Confession: I, F18, have lived alone for 3 years in my own apartment. It might sound freedom-filled to many, especially those still grappling with curfews and the chaos of family life, but my solitude was woven from threads of loneliness, longing, and something else darker that I hadn't expected. When I signed the lease as a naive 16-year-old, I thought living alone would be a thrilling adventure brimming with newfound independence, but that initial excitement quickly morphed into an unforeseen isolation. My friends drifted away, busy with their own lives, and when I wrapped myself in the silence of my one bedroom, I started feeling like a ghost who haunted her own home. It began innocently enough, the occasional creak of the floorboards in the dead of night, tiny movements out of the corner of my eye that I brushed off as the remnants of a mundane day, when shadows appeared to grow longer. Yet my mind couldn't help but fill those gaps with questions. Was someone else in my apartment? Had I inadvertently invited a paranormal entity into my life through my self-imposed isolation? Just last week, as I curled on my couch with a blanket and a half-empty cup of cold tea, I caught a glimpse of somebody, small and fleeting, scutter behind my bookcase. I froze, my heart racing, and reason told me that it was just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the confines of my apartment held more than my simple belongings and scattered hopes. Curiosity grew into obsession as I spent my days searching through online forums and haunted house documentaries, tearing apart my sanity in the pursuit of understanding what lurked just beyond perception. Conversations with friends now consisted of nervous laughter and vague references to weird things in my apartment, as I tried not to show them how deeply unsettling the idea of my living situation had become. Then came the night I finally mustered enough courage to confront what I believed hid within my walls. Armed with a flashlight, I stood in the dim glow of my living room, my heartbeats echoing louder than any noise of the night. I ventured towards the bookcase, muttering to myself that ghosts were absurd, merely figments of an overactive imagination, and carefully, I tilted the furniture enough to peer behind it. My breath hitched as I saw not a ghost but a collection of items: a small, tattered teddy bear, a threadbare blanket, and crumpled pieces of paper covered in scribbles. They were dated, each note a fragment from someone's life squeezed into the space I had thought was solely mine. The notes told a story of sorrow, of someone who had lived there before me, trapped in an unbearable life, and after reading them, I felt a burgeoning empathy for the spirit that once inhabited my home. I realized that my isolation had echoed theirs, a continuous void that gnawed at the edges of happiness. As the days turned into weeks, I began writing letters to that person, sharing my fears, my dreams, and my confessions, about loneliness, about resilience, about wanting to reclaim the space where darkness had once settled. In those late-night scribbles, I started to feel a shift within myself. The burden I had carried began to lift as I bared my soul to the whispers that haunted my hallways. One letter brought an unexpected sense of closure. I realized I could take control of my own narrative instead of allowing the narratives of others, those who had left pieces of themselves behind, to dictate my life. I chose to embrace the solitude, to restore joy within the echo of silence rather than fear it. I decided that it was time to breathe new life into my apartment. Colors replaced the chipped walls, plants breathed verdancy into the once stark corners, and each adjustment felt like a step away from the ghosts of my past, toward a future filled with light. As for the lingering remnants of whoever had come before me, I left their notes nestled in a box with the teddy bear, placing it on a shelf I reserved for cherished memories, reminding myself that our pains often intertwine but do not define us. For the first time in years, my home truly felt like mine. I am no longer living alone, I am discovering myself, and perhaps that was the most profound resolution of all. I know that others may have struggled in similar spaces, so I want to share this tiny epiphany with them. Loneliness can spark fear, but it can also ignite a journey of self-compassion and understanding. Update: a couple of weeks after writing those letters, I woke up to the doorbell ringing persistently. I opened it to find a delivery driver with a package that bore my name. Inside was an unassuming frame, holding my favorite note from that box. Someone had found it and sent it with a sweet card that simply read, "You matter." It might have been a complete coincidence, but in that moment, I felt a sense of connection to the world that I never thought possible in my solitary apartment. I smiled, acknowledging the spectral whispers but no longer captive to them, allowing instead the gentle reminder of belonging to guide me, my once lonely refuge transformed into a sanctuary. This simple act of kindness sparked something deep within me, a flicker of warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the universe was gently nudging me to acknowledge that this solitary life I had carved out wasn't just an existence filled with shadows, but a story filled with possibilities, marked by the serendipity that brought that note back to me at just the right time. Instead of wallowing in my solitude, I found myself daydreaming, imagining connections, friendships, maybe even a sense of community. The thought of meeting someone new didn't seem so daunting anymore. After all, had I not just received a message from a stranger that resonated deeply with my heart? The next day, I ventured out, a little timidly, but with a sort of hopeful determination that was new for me. I stepped into the small cafe down the street from my apartment, the Nook. It was cozy, with the faint aroma of coffee and pastries wafting through the air, wrapping around me like a warm hug. I ordered a chai latte and found myself a corner seat, where I could observe the life bustling around me. I watched people laughing together, sharing stories or moments of quiet companionship, and it reinvigorated a sense of excitement within me. I was struck by the realization that each of them had a story, just like mine, full of struggles and small victories, sheltered within their laughter and chatter. I picked up my journal and began to write, letting the words flow freely from my head to the page. I poured everything into that small notebook, my silly fears, hopes, and musings about life, weaving the fabric of my lonely nights into something vibrant, a tapestry of my solitude transformed. As I left the cafe that day, I felt lighter, a swift breeze danced around me, as if it too was whispering encouragement. Days turned into weeks, and I started making this a routine. My infrequent visits to the cafe blossomed into warm exchanges with the barista, Jennifer, who always remembered my order and threw in an extra pastry on slow days. Then there was Michael, an artist who frequented my corner table, sketching the patrons, and who eventually joined me one afternoon, sharing snippets of his artistic journey while I shared pieces of mine. Each interaction chipped away at the walls I had built around myself, and slowly, I began to see my apartment less like a fortress and more like a resting place, a canvas to dream on, instead of hiding within. I meticulously filled my space with mementos from an enriching life, photos of us laughing at quirky art shows, postcards from old friends, and even framed snippets of conversations that struck a chord. I still had the spectral whispers, but instead of haunting me, they enveloped me in a comforting embrace, an acknowledgement that I was not alone in my experiences anymore. I was a part of something greater, a beautiful life tangled with shared stories, laughter, and creativity. It was one evening, under the soft glow of warm string lights on my balcony, that an unexpected message lit up my phone. It was from the same anonymous number I had received the note from all those weeks ago. My heart raced as I read, "Hi. Where can I send another little something? It felt good to connect, and I would love to remind you again that you matter." My breath caught in my throat, that same warmth rushing back through me, not quite believing the world could be this kind. We exchanged a few messages that evening, the conversation so genuine and easy, as if we had known each other forever despite that initial anonymity. And just like that, a new friendship emerged, filled with laughter and support, reminding me that sometimes, amidst the fog of loneliness, it takes just one little connection to illuminate the path back to oneself. The specters of my past still visited, but now, they merely served to enhance the pieces of life I was reclaiming, quiet reminders of where I had been, which now felt like distant echoes against the symphony of laughter and companionship I was cultivating. I closed my eyes that evening, the cool breeze lightly rustling the leaves, and I smiled softly to myself, feeling a profound sense of belonging within my heart. And even though I had embraced solitude in the past, I was learning to dance a delicate waltz between presence and absence, discovering beauty in both the quiet times alone and the raucous laughter shared. A few weeks later, I received another note, this time not anonymous but signed, Kara, who turned out to be the mysterious sender who had ignited this journey of self-discovery. And though I still cherished my moments of solitude, I had finally learned that reaching out for connection wouldn't drown out my independent spirit but rather complement it. As the seasons shifted outside my window, so too did my perspective, as I rested comfortably in this place I now called home, my sanctuary, filled with the echoes of laughter, art, and an unshakable sense of belonging, a reminder that amidst the chaos of life, we always have the choice to nurture both solitude and companionship, creating a tapestry that is uniquely ours, interwoven with every meaningful connection we dare to make. With the arrival of that unexpected package, a seed had been planted deep within me, urging me to extend my hand beyond the boundaries of my cherished solitude. It was a kind of quiet revolution that felt secure, as if the walls of my apartment had started to lean in a little closer, helping me embrace the world outside. Days turned into weeks, and as the last vestiges of winter surrendered to the warmth of spring, I found myself living harmoniously with my new mindset. The park nearby, once a neglected thought, became an inviting breath of fresh air where I would occasionally. The cold, flickering light of my laptop screen illuminated the dimly lit room, shadows dancing on the walls as I stared at the now infamous executive order on my feed: transgender and non-binary people don't exist. I could hardly believe what I was reading, a wave of disbelief crashing over me, followed by a torrent of emotions I hadn't expected to feel at that moment. As someone who had spent years transcribing the stories of marginalized individuals at a local nonprofit, the implications of such a declaration felt personal. It was as if someone had ripped the very fabric of my work apart. My closest friend, Jamie, had recently transitioned, finally embracing a truth that had been so long suppressed, and I wondered how this declaration affected someone who had only just begun to live authentically. The thought gnawed at me, an unsettling feeling, like a puzzle piece that refused to fit. I picked up my phone and scrolled through social media threads, seeing a mixture of anger, confusion, and sorrow expressed in every post, each one resonating like a silent scream echoing in my own heart. Circling back to Jamie, I could hardly contain my anxiety, so I decided to text him. The three little dots that signify someone is typing seemed to stretch into an eternity. When he finally replied, it was a simple, almost resigned acknowledgement of the order. "It's just another day in the circus, isn't it?" he wrote, an attempt at humor that dripped with bitterness. I felt a wave of sympathy wash over me. I could imagine the weight of that moment and how it might feel to have an essential part of your identity dismissed outright. Trying to lift his spirits, I suggested we meet up for coffee, to talk through things. He agreed, and despite the heaviness of the situation, I felt a glimmer of hope at the thought of seeing him. When we met later that afternoon, the coffee shop was alive with the comforting buzz of conversation and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Jamie sat across from me, his eyes reflecting a mix of resilience and fragility. We chatted lightly at first, exchanging small talk about work and hobbies, but as the topic turned back to the order, a silence fell over us. "It's hard to reconcile," Jamie said, fingers dancing nervously on the edge of his cup. "On one hand, I'm me, unapologetically. But on the other, I see this powerful entity trying to erase that." I felt the lump in my throat, empathy flooding my senses as I carefully searched for the right words. "You exist, you matter," I insisted, passionate yet tender, feeling every bit of the weight behind those words. His quiet smile, tinged with sadness, warmed my heart, and for a moment, it felt like we were cocooned in our shared understanding, momentarily distanced from the chaos of the world outside. As the evening wore on, we found ourselves slowly piecing together feelings we hadn't quite found the words for before. Jamie spoke about his childhood, how he had always felt out of place, struggling against a tide of societal expectations that felt like a choking grip. "Every day is like a battle," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I shared my own struggles with feeling helpless in the face of stigma, describing how I had often felt overpowered by the cacophony of voices in the world, all claiming what was real or not, blurring the lines of truth. A realization hit me: it wasn't just about this executive order, it was about every little moment people like us faced, a constant negotiation for validation in a world that seemed intent on silencing the very essence of who we are. Together, we found solace in the understanding that our narratives were still ours to share, that they could never truly be erased despite the weight of the world. As night fell and the coffee shop emptied, I noticed an overwhelming sense of relief settling in, a soft glow of unity as if we were both warriors, resilient in our truths. We spoke of activism and art, of community, of resilience, and as we laughed, I could see Jamie begin to reclaim his sense of self, his spark igniting against the darkness surrounding us. In the weeks that followed, I became more active online, amplifying voices that were often drowned out by fear and ignorance, while Jamie connected with local advocacy groups, launching a powerful dialogue within our community. One night, he sent me an article he had written about our conversation that day, detailing the resilience found in understanding and love. The comments flooded in, affirming not just his experience but the myriad of stories shared by others who felt invisible. It was liberating to see how art and conversation could combat the darkness, each supportive message shimmering like a beacon of truth. Reflecting on everything, I realized how deeply my worldview had shifted. I was still grappling with the news and its implications, but I was also steadfast in my belief that love and truth could circumvent even the most pervasive of lies. In those quiet nights typing away at the keyboard, I learned that we create our own existence through the stories we tell. Months passed, and while the executive order remained a haunting presence in the background, it faded into perspective, its power diminished by the resilience of those willing to tell their truths. I felt changed, my heart embraced a collective sense of purpose. The world had its challenges, yes, but it also contained countless stories woven together with threads of resilience and hope. As I wrote this final reflection, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, not just for Jamie's friendship, but for those who had spent so long fighting to be seen. Jamie had once told me that it was okay to be tired, but it was never okay to be silenced. I hoped he would always remember that as we continued to carve spaces for authenticity in a world trying so hard to stop us. Update: just last week, Jamie texted to say he received an invitation to speak at a community event focused on advocacy and the importance of representation. I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. He was stepping into a space that bore the shadows of so much doubt yet dared to shine brightly. He was realizing the power of his voice, and in that, all our stories mattered more than the outdated proclamations of those who dared to erase us. In the end, what we lived, what we fought for, would outshine any declarations made in cold executive chambers. It would linger in conversations and bold artistic expressions that could never be silenced. As the applause from the audience enveloped him like a warm embrace, I leaned back in my folding chair, allowing the echoes of his words to dance through my mind. My heart thumped steadily in my chest, a rhythmic reminder of the joyful chaos we had created here today. I was filled not only with pride for him, my partner in this journey, but also with a deep sense of purpose. Together, we had begun to weave a fabric of community, an intricate tapestry reflecting our diverse identities and the myriad experiences that shaped us. The vibrant colors of our lives blended seamlessly, carving out a space where our truths could flourish, away from the grayscale declarations imposed by those who could not begin to understand. It was hard to ignore the tension that still simmered beneath the surface, the whispers of doubt joining the chorus of applause. After all, we were living in a world where acceptance felt like a delicate dance on a precipice. When someone had first shared the news of the executive order at the last community meeting, my stomach had twisted into knots. It felt like a denouncement, a shadow looming over the progress we fought so hard to achieve. Although I held on to the notion that words could wield a power of their own, I couldn't help but feel the sting of uncertainty. Could we retain our collective voice in the face of erasure? More importantly, what could I do to keep that spirit alive, not just for my partner, but for every individual who had ever felt the suffocating weight of invisibility? As the event wound down, I caught up with my partner, his energy still radiant despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. "Do you think we made a difference?" he asked, his brow furrowed as he played with the hem of his shirt, a telltale sign of his nerves surfacing. I placed my hand over his, squeezing gently, letting him know that I believed wholeheartedly that we had. Our voices, our stories, were bridges to understanding, and even if just one person left with a new perspective, it was worth every moment we spent preparing for this day. We stepped outside into the cool embrace of twilight, the soft glow of string lights illuminating the path ahead. In the distance, laughter and chatter filled the air, a symphony of human connection reminding us that we were not alone in this fight. As we walked hand in hand, weaving through the throngs of community members still lingering, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. These stories, our stories, would ripple outwards, igniting sparks of empathy and mattering far beyond the limitations of political declarations. A couple of days later, I found myself scrolling through a Reddit thread titled "Ask Reddit What Are Your Thoughts on the Transgender and Non-Binary People Don't Exist Executive Order?" The comments unfurled like a rapidly blossoming flower, filled with outrage, raw emotion, and unequivocal affirmations of existence. One post caught my eye, detailing an emotion-laden story of a person who had felt incredibly alone until they discovered our community event through a mutual friend. Their words struck a chord within me, reminding me of why we pressed on: acceptance, understanding, and most importantly, the validation of one's own existence as a lived experience. This newfound drive pushed me to engage in the discussions, sharing my own reflections about the event, how every person who stepped to the microphone had shattered the misconceptions surrounding us, and how their voices were part of a greater narrative that no executive order could erase. I felt an electric connection to the thread and watched as the conversation swelled, pouring in solidarity from across the country. These digital exchanges reaffirmed a reality I clung to: people were listening, they were learning, and more importantly, they were empowered to share their truths too. A week later, at a low-key gathering of allies and friends, my partner and I shared stories and laughter over mugs of steaming tea. At one point, he turned to me, a contemplative look lighting his features. "You really think all of this matters?" he asked quietly, his vulnerability shining through the evening's cozy haze. It was one of those moments that felt raw yet comforting, where the air brimmed with possibility. "I do," I replied, the conviction thick in my voice. "Every single person we reach matters. Every story connects us. It's like our own little revolution of hearts and minds." And just as we leaned in closer, focusing on each other amid the soft hum of conversations around us, an uplifting realization washed over me. Even when shadows loom, our resolve lights the way. The world we dream of exists not just in far-off glimmers of hope, but right in that moment, between two souls, acknowledging the power in simply being, thriving, and celebrating the brilliance of life in all its forms. The executive orders, however sweeping and chilling, could never snuff out the vibrant flames of our truths. Through connection, compassion, and shared stories, we would always find a way back to the heart of our collective existence. As the night deepened and laughter echoed, I tucked away the bittersweet contours of the day, knowing that every communal embrace, every shared experience, and every step we took together transformed the narrative for ourselves, and for those who needed the strength to journey alongside us. As the night deepened and everyone mingled, I found myself standing at the fringes of the event, watching the shared joy that radiated from each small circle of friends and allies. The dynamic atmosphere was electric, a tapestry woven from countless stories, and yet, my heart felt a tug of uncertainty amid the laughter. The weight of the day's events lingered like a low fog, the chilling executive order casting a long shadow over our progress. I thought of my younger sibling, Sam, who had been bravely navigating their identity in this increasingly hostile world. They weren't here tonight, which added a pinch of sadness to my pride. I always wanted to shield them from the harshness of ignorance, yet I saw the fire in their spirit, one that refused to die out no matter the storms around them. Just last week, Sam had opened up about their struggles, the doubts gnawing at their self-worth, the troubling whispers that they sometimes couldn't silence, reminiscent of the rhetoric we had both heard echoing from the highest offices in our country. I had encouraged them to come tonight, to step out into the light among a community that would embrace them wholly. To be seen and celebrated among people who were beautifully imperfect, just like us. But in their absence, I was now reminded of how vital this gathering truly was as I watched others share their journeys with unguarded vulnerability. The air hummed with truths that often felt on the brink of being silenced by hatred. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of unity wash over me like waves lapping gently at the shore. It was soothing, yet suffocating, and I could almost hear Sam's voice in my mind, gently teasing me for being so easily swept away by the tide. Gathering my resolve, I approached a group where I recognized familiar faces, friends I hadn't seen for a while. They were deep in discussion about the implications of the recent order, but also about solutions, determined to create safe spaces, both online and offline, where everyone could feel heard and seen. Rather than jump headfirst into the conversation, I paused to listen, absorbing their determination and hope. I realized their fear was laced with a fierce commitment to change. Their voices grew stronger, noting how each of us could influence our larger community through daily acts of kindness and bravery, through the stories we crafted through our lives. It occurred to me that perhaps my role tonight wasn't merely to support Sam, but to actively participate in this movement as well. I stepped into the circle, introducing myself with a solidarity born from shared struggle. The moment felt liberating, though apprehension still fluttered in my chest. We exchanged ideas about storytelling as advocacy, about how our narratives had the power to dismantle ignorance, to build bridges where walls had tried to rise. Slowly, as the night progressed and warmth filled the air, I felt the ghost of doubt slip away, replaced by the conviction that our truths were perhaps louder than any decree aimed at stifling them. I shared my own story, both the light and darkness, how I fought alongside Sam, but also how I learned to celebrate my own identity in the process. As I spoke, I could feel the eyes of strangers turn soft with understanding, each nod and shared expression weaving an unbreakable bond through our momentary vulnerability. In that exchange, I caught glimmers of hope, of answers, of a future that seemed a little brighter than it had just hours before, even under that oppressive cloud of uncertainty. When the event began to wind down, I rechecked my phone, reminding myself to call Sam, believing firmly that they needed to hear, if not the particulars, then the warmth and support that surrounded me now. Comfort in numbers, I thought. Together, we had the strength to push against a world that seemed intent on dismissing us. I found a quiet corner outside the venue under the luminescent glow of string lights, my thoughts clearer than they had been all day. The stars were out, beckoning, and as I dialed, I became aware that no matter how daunting the executive orders, no matter how much power they tried to claim, they could not extinguish the spark we had ignited tonight. And though our fight was far from over, the voices gathered here, the love shared amongst us, and the casual way in which we held space for one another, the collective heartbeat of our truths, were timeless and strong. Sam picked up, and the sound of their laughter spilled into the night, wrapping around my heart. "You wouldn't believe it," I started, offering up the colorful tapestry of stories I had witnessed as we each became threads woven into a larger narrative. In that moment, I knew we were never alone, and our fight, our very existence, would always be more powerful than any words written in the dark. I hung up feeling buoyed by that knowledge, and as I headed back inside to rejoin the festivities, I couldn't help but smile. The journey wouldn't be easy, but it was ours to take, and together, we were undeniably strong. It was the kind of day that drags, one of those afternoons where the sun seems to hang just a little too long in the sky, every tick of the clock echoing through the quiet of my small therapy office, where I usually found solace among my books and wobbly old chairs. After a morning filled with mundane cases, anxiety, a sprinkle of depression, the usual suspects, my final appointment came in the form of a new patient who, unknown to me at the time, would shake the very foundation of my moral compass. When he walked in, I wasn't prepared for the weight of his presence. He was stooped but imposing, a heaviness about him that seemed to suppress the air. He introduced himself as Victor, and I could tell from his accent that he was not from around here. I later learned he was from a war-torn country far removed from my well-insulated suburban existence. At first glance, he appeared like any patient, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of nightmares and shadows. He sat in the chair across from me, those haunted eyes narrowing even further when I caught a glimpse of the scars, physical and otherwise, etched into his skin. "You have to promise not to judge," he said, a quiver in his voice revealing a hint of vulnerability. "I'm not who you think I am." It was an invitation and a warning, as if reality were temporarily suspended, and I found myself leaning forward, curious. As the session unfolded, Victor let slip snippets of his life, recounting tales of violence and chaos that would make a horror movie pale in comparison. He spoke of choices, of battles fought not only against enemies but against his own conscience, and I was struck by the absurdity of it all. I was confiding in a war criminal, a man culpable of atrocities I read about in history books. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on me. What constitutes a person? Should I extend him the compassion I offered all my patients, or could he be irredeemable? As the weeks dragged on, I grew attached to Victor in ways I never anticipated. Each session grew increasingly intimate, laden with discussions of guilt, human nature, and the cyclical nature of violence. He was both a monster and a man seeking redemption. I began to find beauty in his tragic story, bewildered by how he reflected my own fears back at me. Maybe I wasn't just a therapist healing others but a fragile human being grasping for connection in a world teeming with horror. But one fateful afternoon, everything shifted. As he spoke of his past, of time spent wondering whose lives he had claimed in the name of war, a phone call interrupted our session. I instinctively picked up, only to hear a voice crackling on the other end. "We know who he is. He's a wanted man." My heart stammered. The confrontation of my unspoken fears had arrived at my doorstep. Shame surged through me for even allowing myself to feel sympathy for him. The line between right and wrong blurred starkly in that moment, and I widely opened my eyes, desperately searching for some illumination within Victor's steady gaze. "Do you know what you're doing?" I asked him, an accusatory whisper escaping my lips. To my shock, he smiled softly, an expression of understanding and serene acceptance. "I'm trying to come home," he replied, words heavy with implication. In that moment, I realized I had not just been his therapist but a kindred spirit. We sat in silence, a suffocating tension enveloping us as I battled with my professional duty against an unsettling sense of betrayal by my own empathy. When the session ended, my heart remained heavy, complicated, and confused. I didn't actually care. Who had he been before? The person who sat across from me was alive, vulnerable, and paradoxically engrossing. The lines we often draw based on societal norms began to dissolve like sugar in warm water, leaving me disoriented yet intrigued, just wishing for clarity that never arrived. Weeks passed, and I knew I was facing a crossroads. I had to decide, continue treating him and risk my own conscience or sever ties altogether, never allowing the flicker of his humanity to shimmer in my mind again. In the end, I chose to continue our sessions, not because I believed he deserved forgiveness, but because, admittedly, I reveled in the complexity of his existence. I was learning about the human condition in its rawest form. The Psychiatric Association's guidelines, the law, my own moral compass, they all paled against the tapestry of human life I was slowly unraveling. I had not abandoned my ethics but instead had discovered a deeper narrative woven into Victor's story, one that transcended mere black and white thinking. I drifted further into this uncharted territory, committing myself to this man's journey toward redemption, even if it meant grappling with my own shadows along the way. For now, we would wade through the murky waters together, pieces of history intertwined, until clarity illuminated the darkness, if it ever would. Months later, I still found myself reflecting on that initial encounter, how I'd crossed paths with a war criminal who, while undeniably flawed, taught me a profound lesson in humanity. In the end, perhaps without the spark of madness that ignited this unlikely connection, healing could not have truly begun. As I continued my therapy practice, I found comfort in knowing that sometimes understanding rises from the ashes of the past, and the courage to face those shadows becomes a beautiful journey all on its own. As the months continued to unfold, I settled back into the rhythm of my therapy practice, letting the echoes of that initial encounter quiet down, but they never fully dissipated. The ember of our shared experience remained, quietly glowing in the recesses of my mind. My days were usually filled with the mundane yet gratifying tasks of helping others navigate their own turmoil, ordinary sessions punctuated by the lilting sounds of laughter or the occasional sobs spilling forth beneath my watchful, empathetic gaze. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't occasionally grapple with the strange weight of what I learned from my time with him, the man who carried remnants of war upon his shoulders, whose very name echoed like thunder in the stillness of moral conversation. We had exchanged stories that clung to the air between us, tough tales mottled with blood, but juxtaposed by his stark vulnerability. There was a surreal paradox in the way he navigated his undying guilt, the burden of lives lost and the iron chains of memory that clanked heavily in the quiet confines of our sessions. I knew, deep down, that some might balk at the very concept of treating such a soul. Disillusioned by my commitment, they would see this as a grave misstep driven by an overzealous idealism that turned a blind eye to the darker shades of morality. But for me, it evolved into a personal pilgrimage, peeling away layers to uncover something both terrifying and exquisite hidden within the human experience. Despite his history, I felt a task far greater than indictment rested upon my shoulders. It was about bridges and understanding, and the ache of recognizing that every antagonist could very well be a protagonist spun into the wrong story. The sun dipped low over the horizon in a golden farewell most evenings as I closed up shop, and each time I brushed past that creaky door, my thoughts would inevitably drift to him. That connection had shaped every earnest "how are you feeling?" and the gentle nudges toward progress I offered my clients. His haunting presence was like a ghost that had woven itself into the fabric of my life, an uninvited friend who refused to leave. Then came the day when he slipped back into my life, almost effortlessly, like the first drop of rain after a long drought. The clinic's phone rang with an urgency that promptly shattered my thoughts. I answered, only to hear his gravelly voice across the line, the kind that had once stuttered halting truths, now noticeably aged, echoing with fatigue. "I need to talk again," he said, a tremor in his tone, laden with either desperation or hope, perhaps both. My heart sank at the unease lining his words, a reminder of vulnerability sharper than glass. "Of course," I replied, a practiced calm enveloping my own bubbling uncertainty. "When would you like to come in?" We arranged for the next day, and as I hung up, the familiar anticipation flooded my veins, tangled with strands of anxiety. Despite all he'd shared, I wondered just how far the edges of his redemption could stretch. He arrived the following afternoon, a spectral sight clad in shadows and what felt like an ocean of burdens. We exchanged muted greetings, the weight of past sessions settling around us like an oppressive fog. I offered him a seat, the worn fabric whispering against the chair as he sank into it. His eyes were tired but kept alert, deeply searching as if willing me to see the fragments of a man who had been stripped down to the core. "I can't shake it," he admitted, his voice a raw whisper that sliced through the air. "The faces, the screams, they're all still there. I thought talking would help, but..." His words trailed off, leaving a palpable silence that bloomed between us. It felt familiar, each rhythm of his voice resonating with the resonance of our prior discussions, yet the frailness of his current state drew a stark contrast against the usually firm man before me. "I need a reason to keep going," he finally confessed, his anguish laid bare. It dawned on me then, the forgiveness he sought wasn't merely for himself, it was for the world outside, a world that had spun on without acknowledging the depths of his plight. I paused, crafting my words as carefully as a sculptor chiseling a marble block. "You've been through an unimaginable experience, and it's okay to grieve what you've lost, including parts of yourself." Encouragement was met with a deluge of bottled experiences spilling forth. He spoke of harrowing nights haunted by memories of despair and fleeting moments of humanity amid the devastation. It was an outpouring that spilled out over the juxtaposition of life and death, a hammer striking an already fragile heart. I listened closely, offering comfort and space for him to release his burdens. As he shared, I realized that my mere presence was creating a safe sanctuary for his pain. And in return, He was handing me insights into the complexity of humanity, the darkness intertwined with light, the monster wrapped in flesh yearning for understanding. The session meandered along the delicate threads of healing, and when it ended, a smile tugged at my lips. In that moment, what we found was shared resilience, a pact of empathy forged anew. As he walked out, lighter than when he entered, I felt our connection soothe my spirit. Outside my window, the sun dipped below the jagged edges of the horizon, casting everything in a glow that felt almost like fresh beginnings. Somehow, we had salvaged something vibrant from the depths, two souls crafted in fire, sharing an understanding that transcended mere shame or vilification. I knew then, in the ebbs and flows of life, we all carry shadows, but it's how we embrace the light that becomes the heartbeat of our stories. Months would pass again, but this wound would no longer press against the fabric of my soul. It was simply a reminder that healing takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest act one can perform is choosing to understand. It was early morning when I received the call that stirred distant memories, pulling me back into the realm of what had once felt like a fever dream. The familiar tone of my office phone cut through the stillness, echoing in the small, softly lit space where I often found respite among the flood of paperwork and therapy notes. The voice on the other end introduced itself as someone from the local clinic. A quick review of my ongoing cases had flagged some lingering concerns regarding one particular patient, Roberto. His name alone conjured an inexplicable mix of emotions. The bond we had forged itched at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of the chaotic intersection of darkness and light that had forever changed how I viewed suffering and redemption. The directive was straightforward. I must assess his mental state again, as his behavior had begun to spiral back into the shadows. Soft murmurs of concern flared as I listened to the details, words like inappropriate outbursts and intense expressiveness wrapping themselves around the narrative of a man who had once been untouchable in my office, an enigma I had been compelled to understand. A part of me, however reluctant, was ready for this renewed confrontation. I held tightly to the memory of those long sessions where we navigated the raw, jagged edges of each other's truths, his tales of war, chillingly layered with nuance, and my responses, steeped in empathy, attempting to thaw the frozen armor he had forged through a lifetime of conflict. I could still picture him leaning forward, almost animated at times, as he recounted snippets from his past, the smell of distant gunfire, the weight of choices that even fate could not preordain. What had once felt like a burden to sift through now shimmered with the fervor of transformation, reshaping how healing could truly take form. I wondered if I could be his guide again, helping him inch back toward the flickering warmth we had discovered together. When I arrived at the small clinic, the air was heavy with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and unshakable tension. The waiting area felt eerily tranquil, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above as anxious patients clung to the pages of dog-eared self-help books. Roberto sat in the far corner, casting an imperceptible shadow against the walls painted in pastel blues, his hands tight around the frayed edges of his sleeves. Those familiar dark circles encircling his eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of memories refusing to fade. Our eyes met, and within that glance lay everything we had shared, the traumatic echoes of his past and the promise of exploration yet to come. The minute I took my seat across from him, the weight of those shared shadows enveloped us again, as immovable as the gravity of unspoken regret. "Are you all right?" I ventured, noting the slight tremor in his clenched fists. He drew a breath, deeply rooted in unease but tinged with resolve, a mix I had grown to recognize in our sessions. "Sometimes the past just doesn't want to stay behind," he replied, his voice gravelly yet strikingly sweet, like a stone plunged into murky waters, creating ripples of reflection. What followed encapsulated moments that were equal parts heartbreaking and enlightening. Stories tumbled out in jagged snippets, each revealing how the weight of his horrific choices felt heavier still in the light of accountability. As I listened, flashes of recognition flickered within me. All of us, in our own ways, were at war with ourselves, battling regret or shame, yet yearning for connection, a bridge between fractured histories and hope. With each session, I cherished the clarity that arose from our encounters, the understanding that slowly morphed from fear into acceptance, both for Roberto and myself. We weren't separate entities, we were interwoven vessels of experience navigating the escalating tide of emotions that threatened to drown us. He spoke of nights he couldn't close his eyes, of whispered faces that haunted him in fleeting dreams, yet with each confession, a pinprick of healing emerged, connecting us through shared vulnerability. One session melted into another, until bizarrely, the notion of guilt transformed into a raw, electrifying energy, less of an anchor and more of a compass guiding him toward understanding himself, even when he didn't completely believe the journey was justifiable. Months turned into a captivating rhythm of sessions, laden with profound exchanges of love, pain, and redemption. It became clear that he was beginning to redefine his narrative, weaving threads that had only previously been tainted in despair. Finding strength in the light, he learned to speak the truth while bearing that heavy weight. Each session felt like we were peeling back layers of a deeply rooted yet beautiful tapestry. I, too, was unearthing pieces of my own self in the process, questions of morality and humanity grappling within my mind, forging renewed perspectives while allowing empathy to flourish like newfound blossoms in early spring. The day he smiled, truly smiled, was etched like magic in my memory. I want to be better. His words fell like gentle raindrops on parched soil, nourishing the parts of him still yearning for acceptance. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride, for here was a warrior unarmed, wrestling the ghosts of a haunting past. Understanding no longer shackled him but inspired him instead. Yet, just when tranquility seemed to blanket our sessions, whispers of unrest emerged from the clinic, echoing through the hallways about a potential release for Roberto. I found myself at a crossroads, battling anxiety as the thought of him re-entering society and grappling with a world reluctant to embrace those who'd once held the weight of war upon their shoulders tugged at my heartstrings. What if this journey of healing, still so raw, was to be disrupted by a society unwilling to forgive? Each day turned into a nebulous haze where hope and dread revealed themselves as two sides of the same coin. I sought solace in my memories of our progress, yet uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud overhead. When the day finally arrived, and the clinic called me in for one last session before his departure, the room felt electric with unspoken farewells. Roberto emerged quietly, almost reverently, his eyes reflecting an agonizing blend of gratitude and apprehension. As we exchanged the final words, a small part of me clung to the idea that I might see him again, managing to insist on finding connection amid the chaos, willing to embrace the discomfort of disparity. As he stood to leave, our eyes met once more, and I could see it, the light flickering in the depths of his gaze, the will to carry the lessons we had unearthed in the sacred space we'd nurtured. No matter where you go, just remember to seek understanding, I said softly. Theirs was both familiar and alien, intricate tapestries made from war and healing, woven together. Months later, the world beyond the clinic hummed with its relentless rhythm, and I reveled in the quiet strength that silently fortified my practice and life. Healing is indeed a labyrinth, I mused, entwined within shadows and light, and as I reflected on the journey, I realized that sometimes the most painful paths illuminate truths long buried, waiting to re-emerge, the enduring truth that every heart holds the universe of battles fought and emotions shared. Perhaps the real journey lay not solely in the act of healing but in the unwavering spirit that rises, ready to embrace love and connection, even in the wake of madness. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, it was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I sat, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, how the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscence of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, we had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. "Please, let this not be a step backward," I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment. When the news rolled in about the upcoming 2024 general election, I felt something shifting within me, an unfamiliar sensation bubbling up that wrestled for dominance, an unsettling mix of anxiety and detachment that I couldn't quite place. My name is Alex, a 33-year-old graphic designer living in a small town in Ohio, where politics always seemed to be the gossip just shy of being casual dinner conversation. I had always practiced my democratic right with diligence, feeling the pull to make my voice heard, but this year, as I sifted through the barrage of political ads and polarizing debates, the thought of participating began to feel like an undertaking I was no longer prepared to shoulder. My friends, a close-knit group that loved long discussions over cheap beer in dimly lit corners of our favorite pub, were animated about their plans to vote, each of them ready to champion their chosen candidate with fervor. I sat quietly, an observer in a room full of political fervor, my heart heavy with an unspoken truth. I had made the decision to abstain. In the weeks leading up to the election, I found myself grappling with the consequences of my choice, wrestling with guilt. The fear of being judged loomed over me like a dark cloud, especially when Marissa, one of my closest friends, looked me in the eye and asked point-blank why I wasn't getting involved. Her passion was palpable, a stark contrast to my silent disillusionment. I had always prided myself on being the progressive voice in our group, often debating to the wee hours about the state of the nation, but at that moment, I felt a chasm forming between who I was and who I was expected to be. As the October sky turned gray, the chatter about the election only intensified. All around me, people began sharing their reasons to be hopeful, while I remained bound within my cocoon of reluctance and ambivalence. On election day, I made my way to the polling station as if pulled by an invisible force, my heart racing with indecision. But as I stood in line, watching the excitement cascade off my neighbors, their hopeful faces illuminated by the promise of change, I couldn't help but feel that my choice had carved out a hollow space in my chest. I turned away from the polling booth. I didn't cast my vote, and the relief that washed over me felt like a strange, slippery comfort, reminding me of the countless times I had ignored what I really wanted. Days passed, turning into weeks, and I rejoined my friends, feigning enthusiasm about the election results while internally grappling with an overwhelming sense of being an outsider. But with every social gathering, the question beckoned: how would I reconcile my decision? My internal turmoil simmered, and I slipped into a routine that felt numbingly safe. Over beers one night, Marissa caught me staring off into space, her brow furrowing with concern. "Don't you care where this country is headed?" she asked, half jesting but genuinely curious. The truth was, I did care, but it was the decision-making process that had weighed on me like an anchor. I finally took a breath, confessing that while I had chosen abstention, I was scared of both the consequences and the implications of my choice, a choice that was fundamentally my own. The bar quieted, the noise of surrounding conversations faded as unexpected empathy settled among us. "You know, it still counts that you thought it through, right?" Marissa said softly. "Taking a stand is more than just voting." Those words resonated deeper than I anticipated, stirring something lost within me. A sense of relief washed over me like a warm wave, and I suddenly found clarity amid the chaos. As I walked away from the pub that night, thinking of the natural ebb and flow of democracy, I realized my decision didn't have to define me. It echoed back to the importance of understanding my values, and the courage to live with my choices, even those that differ from others. A few weeks later, I returned to the forum that sparked this exploration, drawn by a post titled "Voting Eligible Americans Who Deliberately Abstained in the 2024 General Election. How are you feeling about your decision?" My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I began to type, feeling surprisingly cathartic. I didn't vote, and I had to confront something within myself that needed attention. I wrote, detailing my feelings of isolation, the conversations I had with friends, and the beauty of owning my narrative, free from the chains of expectation. The replies came flooding in, each comment filled with support and encouragement, a sign that I wasn't alone in my experience. As the reflections flowed, I understood that sometimes the silence was louder, and in the stillness of my decision, I found my voice, a piece of me I thought I'd lost amid the tumultuous noise of others. Even if I hadn't marched to the ballot box, I had started a new conversation within myself, a dialogue that brought me peace and a sense of reconnection with those around me. In the back of my mind, I felt the tide beginning to turn, waiting for the next election, where I would be ready, not just to vote, but to connect, to engage in the very democracy I feared for so long. And that felt, in so many ways, like a victory. The days turned into weeks, and as the leaves turned their brilliant colors of fall, I found myself in a reflective state more often than not. I could feel that familiar blend of anxiety and relief slipping away simultaneously. It astonished me how something as simple as acknowledging my own feelings about participation could liberate my mind. I had been caught in a cycle of feeling pressured to engage in a political landscape I found overwhelming. Watching the news had become akin to walking through a foggy forest, the shadows of tensions looming everywhere, but clarity eluded me. I decided it was time to share my realizations, and I did so with friends over warm coffees and cozy dinners, often nestled in our favorite cafe, the one adorned with local art and the warmth of community. It sparked conversations that felt refreshing, the kind I hadn't experienced in ages, where we discussed not only the frustrations of the political process but also our own experiences and insecurities surrounding it. Through these candid exchanges, I realized I was not alone. Others had their own hesitations, some had chosen to abstain not out of apathy but due to a lack of transparency in a system that felt rigged. It was refreshing to uncover these truths, and my heart swelled with an emerging sense of solidarity. I began to take part in community debates and local gatherings, often simply to listen, absorbing perspectives that broadened my understanding of the issues plaguing us. Each conversation, each shared laugh or sigh of frustration, chipped away at the barricade that I had built around myself over the years. You see, I was always the quiet one, the thinker who mulled over every word before they left my lips. As a child, I'd be lost in my books while the world outside thrummed with the energy of life, utterly consuming yet seemingly foreign. But now, I discovered that the threads of connection we forged could be powerful tools for change. On a chilly November night, as the first snowflakes felt like whispers on my cheeks, I found myself in a small community center, seated in a circle of open hearts and eager minds. We were there to discuss the issues we faced and how we could foster a more transparent dialogue in the political realm. I spoke, not with fear but with intent, sharing my journey of abstaining from voting. When I finished, I was met with nods and insightful questions that encouraged deeper reflections. I felt the comforting warmth of acceptance wash over me. It turned out authenticity was the key, allowing everyone to relax their guard, igniting a fire to participate. Each of us had varying experiences with the electoral process, and as we spoke, I noticed a shift. Our frustrations morphed into ideas, ideas sparked plans, and plans became action. By the time Christmas rolled around, the spirit of togetherness was palpable, and we were organizing small initiatives to educate our community about local governance, breaking down barriers that often made participation feel insurmountable. The more we spoke, the more I realized that my decision to abstain was only a moment in a larger narrative, one that now included countless voices all demanding to be heard. Amid the glow of holiday lights, I felt a profound sense of duty begin to bloom alongside my old fears. I could finally see the beauty in civic engagement. Ours was a collective journey, one shaped by our joys and our struggles. I even found myself having conversations with family, my parents included, who always assumed my quiet nature translated to passivity. They listened, surprised to hear me share my newfound passion, the convictions bubbling up like a fresh spring. We agreed the political system was far from perfect, yet we recognized together the power we wielded in our communities. As 2024 approached, rather than feeling burdened by decision fatigue, I felt empowered by possibilities. I continued to stay informed, setting aside my cynicism and instead rooting for change rooted in compassion and understanding. Each small gathering, every collective decision we made, ignited a spark in me. I felt hopeful in a way I hadn't in many years, ready to march not just into the next election but into every conversation that needed to happen, ready for any certainty and uncertainty that may unfold. And so, as I look back upon those fleeting moments, I carry not just the weight of my previous decisions but the understanding that each vote matters, and each voice, mine included, deserves to be heard loud and clear. And who knows? Perhaps when the next election rolls around, I won't just find my voice, I'll help others find theirs, as our stories intertwine in this complex tapestry of democracy that we are all learning to navigate together. As the days turned to weeks after that pivotal moment of realization, I found myself reflecting on the conversations I'd had with friends and family who, like me, had waded through their own complexities regarding the political landscape. Each gathering, whether it was over coffee in the early morning light or during lazy evenings watching the sun dip below the horizon, became a safe haven where we could peel back the layers of our doubts and fears. Collaboratively, we explored the weight of our choices, the regrets and hopes that clung to the shadows of our decisions as much as they did to the bright moments of clarity we unexpectedly stumbled upon. I remember one specific evening in early December, when a heavy snowfall blanketed the world outside, casting a quiet that settled into our hearts. We nestled together in my living room, curled up with blankets, hot chocolate warming our fingers, the soft glow of candlelight flickering in the corners. It was here that we spoke openly about the nuances of political abstention and choice, as real faces and names flashed through our minds, struggles and joys intertwined. Why didn't we just vote? My friend Sarah asked, crunching her marshmallow-laden treat between her teeth, her eyes wide and searching. I could feel the weight of her gaze. We had all pondered that question at some point, and as the air filled with warmth and a hint of vulnerability, I decided to share. Because I was scared, I finally admitted, my voice gentle yet firm, scared that whatever I chose could cause more harm than good, that my one little voice wouldn't matter in the cacophony of noise. Slowly, the others began to share. It was as if each unraveling thread brought us closer together. We each found safety in the collective breath of shared uncertainty, our voices merging into a symphony of reassurances, echoing the notion that we could all relate, a tapestry of human experience meeting at the heart of our insecurities. But now, I continued, emboldened by our exchange, I realize that even silence is a choice that echoes through the halls of democracy. I'm more determined than ever to navigate this journey, not just for me, but for everyone who feels unheard. I could see the spark resonate as it ignited within my friends, and that feeling lingered, illuminating our discussions over the following weeks. As the holiday season brought us together again and again, those conversations helped dissipate the clouds of doubt that hung over our heads, slowly transforming into beams of anticipation for what lay ahead. Each time we met, I felt more assured, more equipped to engage not just in political debates but in the human element of our experiences. We shared stories beyond the confines of voting, ones that traversed familial struggles, economic uncertainties, and the broader, aging questions about morality and justice. When January rolled in, I found myself feverishly reading about local candidates and nurturing a curiosity about issues that had once felt foreign to me. It became increasingly clear that I didn't merely want to educate myself, I yearned to empower those around me to feel that same thrill, the kind of passion that ignited a fire in our hearts. We organized small, casual meetups to discuss what mattered to us, drafting a loose plan to engage with others in our communities, and I could see the excitement ripple through our group. The days brightened, not just because spring was thawing winter's edge but because I felt the stirrings of a movement blossom among friends, neighbors, and a dawning belief that were we to come together with empathy and purpose, we could all carve out a space in this intricate system of governance that so often felt distant. It was a tangled web, yes, but one I was now eager to explore, step by step. As the chatter of the upcoming primary elections flickered on the horizon, I knew I would not be tiptoeing into my first vote alone. That commitment to re-engage came with promises layered in love for my community and the unyielding desire to be a part of something larger than myself. No longer would I hide behind the veil of silence, waiting to be swept away, for now my voice was a thread woven into the ongoing conversation, rippling outward to others waiting to share their stories too. With each heartfelt discussion, I felt more assured that we each had power, not just in the voting booth but in our stories, our connections, and the courage to face uncertainty together. And who knows? Perhaps the next time I stood in line at the polling place, I wouldn't just be looking for my own voice but ready to encourage my fellow citizens to find and raise theirs, fusing our energy in a chorus of hope, and stepping into a future we could all believe in. As I settled into bed that night, enveloped by the gentle hum of life around me, I let myself drift, comforted by the knowledge that, regardless of the election's outcome, a new chapter had begun, not just for me, but for all of us navigating this shared journey.